The original plan for this presentation was actually to start with some of the background and the methodology that goes into the scenario planning process, which I think would complete the story as to why we're doing this community engagement, this online community engagement piece that we're going to talk about here in a moment. One of the things that we've learned through going through these processes elsewhere is that planners like maps. I'm a planner, I love them. They're nice for me to look at. I can understand them, interpret them. But they're not so easy for the majority of the population, really, particularly when you're trying to understand regional issues. A member of the community likely will go to a map, try to find where they live, understand the impacts on their locality, and completely miss the opportunity to explore the impacts on the region as a whole, which is really the premise for this entire exercise. So as we went through, and I think many of you know, we were and have been engaged in the Des Moines area regional plan, which was it's the same class of grantees as this region. They're in the third year of their grant plan right now. As we went through that process and we were out in the community, we realized this gap in the communication about what the scenario planning process was meant to be and what people were seeing. These maps look like plans, which they're not. They're scenarios. They're tools for learning about the trade-offs of various decisions and the impacts of planning decisions at the regional level on individual priorities. And that became really the basis and the foundation for the online collaboration tool, which we created for that exercise, and we called Design My DSM. DSM is the call letters for the Des Moines Airport. People identify with it in the region as kind of a tagline for Des Moines. And through an outreach process of its own, that was the name that they selected. Anyway, the purpose of that piece was to help people understand first what their priorities were. And we've gone through a process with a group of people, some of whom are in the room here in this region, to figure out what those priorities ought to be. So that people could understand, first weigh in on what their priorities are for the future, and then through the tool understand the impacts of different policies, projects, and various elements of the regional planning process, what those policies and projects, how they would impact those priorities. And it became a very effective tool for us to communicate the scenario planning process to the community. It also became a very good way for us to engage what is typically an underrepresented segment of the population in the traditional public meeting, which is a young demographic. And when we're doing long-range planning like this, that's a demographic we really want to tap into. So if we're on a 40-year, or in this case going out to 2040, people in their 20s are going to be the policymakers and the decision makers at that point in time, and that's a group we want to make sure has a chance to weigh in on a long-range plan for the region. And the online collaboration tool allows us to do that. So that's kind of the background as to how we got to where we got with that tool. We were then approached by a group out in Denver, which some of you may have heard of, a group called Place Matters. They're a nonprofit organization really focused on the technology space and planning. Everything they do is open source, so anybody can come to Place Matters to gather information or adapt tools that have been developed through Place Matters to their own planning exercises. They, turns out they've been working with a number of other HUD grantees throughout the country. And as we were collecting data for the Design My DSM tool, which you'll see in a moment, we were noticing lots of hits from places like Tennessee, Utah, Southern California, and it's because they were showcasing a variety of tools that are available to the HUD grantees for gathering input from the community. And it turned out that a lot of other communities were interested in doing something like this, so they approached us to create an open source version of the tool, which we've done, and we're now adapting here in this region. So that's the background. I know that all sounds very abstract. It'll become more real in a moment as we walk you through the tool itself and welcome any questions or comments that you have. Chris is going to give kind of a live demo of the Design My DSM tool. What we do in this region will look different. The idea is to customize it to the region and the priorities here, and that requires input from everybody that's part of this planning process to guide what those priorities that we want to test are, what the trade-offs are going to be of different decisions that we make along the way. So with that, let me switch screens and turn it over to Chris.
All right, thanks, James. It's good to be here in person. Thank you, everybody, for your time. So as James said, definitely the easiest way to understand this is just to see it live. So this is live. It's a web platform. Still collecting data. So the first screen you see is basic self-identification optional fields if people feel comfortable filling them out. So one of the interesting features of all of this is that we locate the responses geographically by zip code, so you can start to see what some of the commonalities or some of the differences are between the different communities in your region. So each of the screens kind of has this intro step that explains what you're supposed to be doing. And if you think about the overall flow, there's three basic steps of this tool. The first step is where you articulate what your priorities are, and it's very much kind of from an individual community member's perspective. It's not supposed to be technical or complicated. It's things like what you see on the screen. I can walk, bike, or take transit to important destinations. There's a park near my house. I'm safe from flooding. These are basic things that members of the community might want. We also are trying to represent a broad range of priorities in this list. And again, all of this is going to be customized for this region, and we are currently actively working to develop this list and have it reviewed. And so the final product for Northeast Ohio will look a little different, but the concept is still basically the same. So it's not just a question of getting these priorities on the screen. We actually give people a certain number of stars, and we want them to prioritize them. So you go through and you start ranking the different priorities. And you can see as you do it, this graphic on the right, which we call your badge, basically representing your priorities. The different icons correspond to different priorities. So this is the icon for being safe from flooding, and the more stars you give it, the bigger the icon becomes. So you go through, and then you notice that your stars are starting to run out. People tend to over prioritize up front initially, and then you can kind of go back and you can say, maybe this isn't as important to me as I thought. I'm gonna take some stars away. That's gonna free up some for my pool, and then you can just go down the list and you can allocate them as you see fit that matches your priorities. And once you get down to the bottom, it starts to constrain your options a little bit in terms of what you can select. But after the end of that process, then you get your badge on the right, which represents your personal priorities. So this is the first screen, and then once you're done with this screen, the second part of the tool is where we start bridging the gap between what your individual priorities are and what some of the potential projects and policies could be that could be pursued within a regional planning project. And then this is really an educational step. So this is for people to really understand what the relationships are between the things that they know that they value and some of the civic or planning actions that could affect them. So basically, you go through and you click on these different options. So there's a list of projects on the left. These are things like economic development initiatives, redeveloping vacant properties, regional attraction downtown. Again, this list is going to be customized for Northeast Ohio. All of these things in the projects list presumably cost money, and that'll come into play, especially in the third part of this exercise. And then there's some policies at the bottom, policies about zoning, density, and the way this works, this is really meant to be an educational step. So you click on one of the items on the list, and the first thing that you see is the effect that item has on your priorities. So for example, the ones in the yellows and the oranges have negative impacts, and then the ones in green have a positive impact. So if you select add more parking, you can see that has a negative impact on flooding. And the point of this is you say, okay, why does that, what's the relationship between those two things? And so you can click on your priority badge, and then you can, each one of these relationships actually has kind of a thought and ranking behind it, that if somebody's interested in understanding why that project impacts their priorities in that way, they can click on it and get more information. But that this is optional. We don't want to make people wade through a ton of text, but that's there in the background if they're interested to understand why those relationships are the way they are. And it's also meant to start building vocabulary for the stakeholders, for the community, so when they're coming to workshops, they can understand the issues a little bit better, and just one more way of trying to build capacity and education. So that's kind of the middle step that bridges the exercise. And then the final step, you say, put your money where your mouth is. So if you were in charge and you have a limited budget, which projects would you fund? Which policies would you vote for? Which policies would you support? So similar to the first screen, you have a limited amount of coins. So you have 12 coins, and things obviously are going to cost a lot of different amounts. So let's see. So TIF spending, downtown amenities, you get for a lot of these things. For a lot of these things, we give people a range. So, for major regional attraction downtown, that could be anything from streetscape upgrades all the way to a new stadium or some massive investment. So we want to give some sort of gradient there. People can have a couple different options. So, you go through and you select the projects that you want. And on the right, it's a similar kind of setup as the second screen, where each selection you make, you can see how it affects the priorities that you chose on the first screen. And some of these are some of these get pretty expensive. So, for example, the light rail transit system. So obviously, light rail is really expensive. That's something that a lot of people say they want, or said they want in Des Moines, and so that's something we heard from the initial workshops, that people were giving us feedback. They really want light rail, they want a better public transit system. Well, so the densities that would be required to support it, and the money to pay for it is actually quite high. So this is an instance where you can really drive that point home. I think this may actually cost all 12 of your coins if you want to do that. And so it's sort of a way to reinforce this concept, like, well, you could do it, but then that's basically all you could do in this exercise. And these, the budget figures are relative, but they're accurate. And we have this sort of index currency that we've created to calibrate the costs. So anyway, so you go through, you select the projects that you want to support. You give thumbs up or thumbs down to different policies. And these are the same as the ones on the other screen. Again, you can see the relationships on the right. And then that's it. And then you submit it. And normally, is it going to pop up? Okay. So while while that's working, I guess. Okay, here we go. So your design profile, that's the graphic on the right. I was calling that the badge. So you can post it on Facebook, you can email it. People actually got really into this in Des Moines. They made T-shirts, and people were putting them on Facebook, and the map results is
part of it's working right now. The rest of it's taken down.
Chris, can I ask a quick question while you're waiting?
Yeah.
Are the indices or whatever's on the left, are they always in the same order, or do they roll the way a vote, a ballot might?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in our initial deployment of the tool, they were the same each time, but then this time around, we want to start randomizing them. Yeah, so that's a good question. I'm
not sure the maps.
Yeah, so I mean, when we deployed this in Des Moines, we specifically timed it in the schedule so that we could get the feedback and start incorporating it into some of the scenario development. And because it was tied to the development time frame, there was a very constrained window in which we needed to get responses if they were to be counted for the scenario. People are still filling this thing out now from Des Moines, and it's great to just have online, have live as an educational tool, and it can just live online, and it has value. But the spatial aspect of it, which the mapping function is down right now, but normally this will...
Go to compare scenarios, that's still up.
right? So there's actually two ways that this maps the information that you provide. The first is on the map results tab. It actually shows you by community what people have been voting for. And you can go down the list. You can say, what are the different priorities that people have been voting for in my community and elsewhere, and you can map it in a variety of ways. What are the projects that people have been voting for? So that's the map results screen. The compare scenarios screen is also spatial. It's a little different. So in this case, when we deployed this tool in the process, we already had a couple scenarios created. So you can select a scenario, and then you can see, using the same kind of graphical convention, you can see what the impact of that scenario is going to be on the priorities that you selected on the first screen. And then there's an option to explore the scenario spatially in a little bit more detail. Yeah, Jason.
When you talked about you can show the results by community, is that just by political unit, or can you also show by different demographic groups or by neighborhoods or sub-areas in a larger community?
Yeah, you can basically slice up the data any way that initial screen would support, and you can aggregate the spatial data up as long as the boundaries of whatever you want to aggregate it up to generally match zip code boundaries. So if your zip code boundaries generally match municipal boundaries, you can report them by municipality, which is what we did here. We had 19 municipalities. In this case, it's a lot more, so I don't know if county makes the most sense or municipality. It's an open question, but we could do it. The data is granular enough that we can aggregate it to multiple spatial levels.
Thanks.
Yeah. So that's the idea. That's the tool. It serves a variety of purposes. This isn't just for scenario planning. It's a way, as James said, it's another way for people to get engaged in the process and really to understand what we're talking about, understand what some of the issues are, and in somewhat of a non-spatial way, even though there's at the back end there's some mapping options if people are interested in looking at those. And so it builds the educational aspect of it. But it also connects with the scenarios. So in this case, for Northeast Ohio, when we get down the road and we start doing alternative scenarios and we start developing a preferred regional scenario, we can draw on this data as one source that can guide that scenario. How do we know what's preferred? Well, we have ongoing outreach. We have the workshops. That's a major element. We're going to talk about that more in the presentation. But we also have a tool like crowd gauge, and we can actually summarize the responses quantitatively. We can start to see how different places relate or maybe don't relate to each other on different issues, and then the prioritization really allows us to hone in on a couple key issues, like what are the top 3 or 4 issues that people really want to see explored in depth in this scenario. And this basically just gives you a one-for-one kind of at the broad regional level to understand what some of those priorities are.
Just one follow-up, and Jim had mentioned open source, so is CrowdGauge itself open source?
Yep.
Great, thanks.
When we selected this team, both the scenario planning and the CrowdGauge are open source, and that was one of the things that appealed to us in terms of the building of an organization and building of the capacity. I would also point out that as we've thought through the CrowdGauge, the original proposal was essentially, at least the original schedule had it just coming up and going down for a fairly limited period of time. We see some real value in keeping it alive during the entire process, drawing off that information, but tying that also to the person-to-person outreach and to the survey, the two other surveys that Triad is scheduled to do. Different probes into the body politic here to see where people are, and to be able to see. The other thing that was struck us about this was the ability to disaggregate not only by community but really by metro, because a lot of the decision making about, particularly on the infrastructure side, is going to be made at the MPO COG level, and so your ability to sort of say, oh, that's lovely for the region, but I really have I've got 4 counties to deal with my board, Joe, and I wanted to be able to report how our people are responding, what are the issues within our communities, and have put it in a broader context, be able to drill down.
I was telling the group that got a brother that lives in Des Moines. I went out and visited him a couple weeks ago. And they were talking about this urban core. A couple of people who were in a meeting with us when I was telling them about this group and that y'all did work out there. Now, one thing came back to me when I went out there, that I used to live in Omaha, Nebraska. I forgot about the wide open spaces out there. It's wide open. When I had to go from West Des Moines to go to the airport, I realized how much wide open space. So, in looking at here in Northeast Ohio, the geographic makeup and the landscape, would there be any thought given to the questions that you ask in Des Moines versus what you would ask here?
Absolutely. Yeah. And we need to put that on the table.
And it might be
this process affords you the opportunity to put those issues on the table and let people react to them.
Abandonment is a big issue.
But it's something that we have. It's hard to talk about, but as people start to process and understand what that means to them personally, it becomes a much better tool for having that discussion. So yeah, these will all be, and they are already being customized.
It's hard to talk about, but it's start to interpret and understand.
The other point I want to make is this is not meant to replace the traditional these processes,
and they are already being customized to the issues that are important.
Access. It's an additional part of it. We still need to go out to. Not everyone's going to fill this thing out online.
This is not meant to.
Be a lot of people who aren't comfortable with it or don't like technology or it's a trust issue. But it will capture a demographic that we would have otherwise missed, as I said, that I think is important to thinking about the future. So there's going to be a lot of other ways with which we're going to gather feedback. We're going to have interactive working sessions at these community workshops where we're going to get people with a low-tech alternative with stickers and markers and all of that. This is just an add-on to that process. Any other questions?
Can an individual fill out more than one of these?
We limit by IP address.
The question is, how many entries? If you have a household, for example, I think we limited it to 5 or 10.
I don't know.
We can limit it. We can pick the number.
Yeah.
The trick comes when you have a public station in a library, but we can work around those issues.
Yeah.
Speaking of libraries, one of the key parts of the engagement process is working with the library system in Northeast Ohio, where this particular idea is struck home with. Chief. Jeff, do you want to talk a little bit about what our discussions have been with the library?
Well, we are working through the Cuyahoga County Public Library to network with the libraries throughout the region on having this available on the computers that are at the library itself, as well as on the library's homepage, and then to have like little table tents about this next to the computers themselves at the library. So a couple different options that way. We may even present some how-tos to some of the libraries, just a quick memo about how to use it so that they understand what it is too.
Following up on Jason's question about the breakdown, right now, my understanding was the zip code is as far down as you go.
Yeah.
And you have not done anything other than that. And so, is it your assessment that given the purpose of this and your use of it at this point, it wouldn't be of any use to try to be more detailed than that?
How detailed would you get?
Well, I'm just in concept, I guess. I can imagine a situation where that piece of information and the detail of it for future reference could be very useful.
Yeah.
It's a question of the cost and the accuracy and how you would do it. You know, that
it can also be a deterrent in some way. I think zip
Right.
code is a very common way that this type of survey data is collected, so people feel anonymous enough to give accurate zip code data. And if they're getting a pinpoint,
Right.
GPS dot on a map, maybe less so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
That's
and those,
just a question.
yeah, I can see the pros and cons of that, and the cost effectiveness of it, and so just wondered.
That was our logic, was that
Yeah.
people would generally provide that information without much hesitation.
Right.
In this case, it might even make more sense to aggregate at a higher level just because there's so many zip codes. Yeah.
Well, and really, zip codes are important to the Postal Service, but after that. So I wonder if you had a separate, developed locally mapping unit that wouldn't be overly cumbersome, but maybe more relevant than zip codes, that would still be a potential option, would you say?
Yeah, there's two ways to do it. One is you have the person filling it out report their affiliation with that, which could be hard. I mean, because I feel like people are going to know their zip code, their city, and maybe their county. But if there's some sort of geographic crosswalk table that we can do on the back end, then we can definitely do something like that. Like the person who's filling it out puts their zip code, but we aggregate those up to whatever spatial, division makes sense, which could be an already formalized division like a municipality, or it could be some custom grouping potentially. But then we could aggregate it up and re-report those according to those geographic units. I mean, like we reported by city here, we didn't report by zip code, just there were so many of them. So yeah, we could do that.
Yeah. So it's really a cool tool. I like it a lot. I think though, to your point about not everybody's going to do this. You know, I guess how do you qualify that? Because I can understand some people with language barriers, or it is a little sophisticated. There's an educational barrier. I think that'll inhibit some people. So I guess how do you qualify the results of this and is representing who? Is there? Can you tackle that, or have you seen that as an issue?
Yeah, we have some slides that show what the results of all of this have been, and because we get that demographic data up front, which was pretty good, what most people provided, it was obviously skewed towards a younger demographic. One of the things that we really pushed for but didn't succeed with the MPO was in charge of doing the planning grant, is to get people out of the community at schools or community centers, libraries, to sit down and help facilitate the process for people who wanted to participate but maybe wouldn't on their own. So that's another way to do it. If there's at our meetings or at other outreach meetings, not necessarily the workshops, to have a facilitated process. But it's going to be it's not going to be statistically relevant, and we are subject to whatever response rate we can get. So that said, it was still very useful, if only to go back to the community and say, this is what the tool has reported, now reacting to that as well. There's another way for people to get the information in a different format that they can understand and react to. Some people thought that the original direction that we gathered using this tool was quite relevant. Others felt differently, but that was part of the more robust outreach program, so people could provide that impact. Every tool, I think, has its limitations, and we talked early on about what was the ideal response rate. 10% per community seemed great, but for the downtown Des Moines, that was going to be a big chunk of the population, large one. So we got close to 10% in many of them, but nowhere near that. So I don't know what the right answer is.
I would just hate to see the tool skewed away from some marginalized populations that might otherwise not be.
I think, I think our team, all of us, have a responsibility to promote it, communicate it, through various channels, and that the PMO is doing, that our strategies is doing, that we're going to be doing. I mean, so I think we certainly want to be aware of that and try to do as good of a job as we can up front. The other thing I was going to add, that at least in the Des Moines case, was this was actually really useful for people that were resistant to the overall project and the process, like who were very critical of what we were doing, and they would say, so we could say to them, like, you guys are pretty well organized, you show up to the workshops, that's great, go online and vote. Like, if you feel that way, if you feel like, there should be no regulations and no taxes, and that, like, go vote, and then see what your neighbors think, and you can actually map the responses. It's, I don't know how many of them are comparing themselves with their neighbors, but if you look at the results, it's pretty clear that people do value things like public transit, they do value things like parks. So when you're in the workshop setting, some of those louder voices can kind of drown out the conversations of other people, but this is sort of an equalizer platform where people can sort of go on and at their own time, you know, at their own house or at their own leisure, and kind of fill this out. Start to see some of the patterns emerge. I think it's pretty interesting.
Did you find that did you identify any extremely underrepresented groups? Underrepresented that stuck out?
As part of this exercise?
Yeah.
No, not as part of this, but we were aware of certain minority communities in certain geographic locations that needed to actually go there, right? That was clear, and that was part of the overall outreach strategy. Particularly as minority-owned business communities were not being well represented. We needed to organize around that, for example. But we knew that. We knew that as a separate issue.
This is probably a question more for all of us than for you guys, but I think it would be really valuable to have our board fill this out and, you know, compare all the responses and just see, you know, amongst the 33 people or whatever, what did we prioritize? I think that would be really cool.
Yeah. We'd start with the board before we release.
We'd be good guinea pigs.
Is that my zip code, Jason?
44313.
This would be good. The notion of having a limited amount of money that you can spend, so to speak, is would be a great decision model to use with your AMETS board.
Absolutely.
And to Gene's point, I think we do need to put together a very specific, targeted plan to reach as many of the populations as we can, particularly those that have been typically marginalized. And you did talk about libraries, and we had part of that conversation during the work session. The housing authorities, I would suggest we even try to go into high schools maybe. And so different folks that have computer rooms and trainings, and just open it up. Maybe even we can hit different companies, corporations, or clubs like Rotary Club, Kiwanis clubs, any of those kind of things that we can get the information out to them and walk people through it.
That's a great idea.
You know, as a matter of fact, I know that many of us do speaking engagements for different kinds of organizations. I myself have a couple of them coming up, and it would be great to talk about this a bit.
Great. So we're right at about 1 o'clock, and as we transition, we'll come back after all of the other regular business for the board meeting and dive into the rest of the presentation. I hope this was useful.
I'd like to call to order the board meeting of the Northeast Ohio Sustainable Communities Consortium. Today's Tuesday, March 26th. Welcome to all of our board members, and thank you for taking the time to come to this very important meeting. I'd also like to welcome our guests. Today we have, although they're not here yet, we will have with us the International Friends of Akron, and they have, or they will be bringing with them a delegation from the Ukraine who will be observing our discussion on regionalism.
Who are people? Who's everybody? Just what we do is go on the line. We have.
Okay. If we can start with an introduction of the consortium members. Starting on that side, please.
I'm Carl Brinkley, NEOSCC.
Erin Siebel with Summit County. Shauna Doherty with Cuyahoga Metropolitan Housing Authority.
Freddie Collier, City of Cleveland.
Pam Hawkins, Akron Metropolitan Housing Authority.
Nancy Cook, City of Akron.
Joe Hadley with NEFCO.
Mike Lyons with the Regional Prosperity Initiative.
Jeff Dodson with the Stark County Area Transportation Study.
Rachel Lewis, Stark County Regional Planning Commission.
Peggy Carlo, Asheville County Commissioner.
Shara Davis, Lorraine County Community College.
Mike Challenger, Lorraine County Growth Partnership.
Kelly Harris, NEOSCC.
Jason Segedy, AMATS.
Grace Galucci, NOACA.
Hunter Morrison, NEOSCC.
Fred Wright, Akron Urban League.
John Getchie, Eastgate Regional Council of Governments.
Rachel McCartney with Eastgate.
Bill Miller with Trumbull County.
David Beach from the Cleveland Museum of Natural History.
Brad Whitehead, the Fund for Our Economic Future.
Bill Davignon, City of Youngstown.
Angie Byington, City of Elyria, alternate for Mayor Holly Brenda.
Gene Nixon, Summit County Public Health.
Ed Cheris, Director of Regional Collaboration for Cuyahoga County.
Greg Brown, Policy Bridge.
Okay, next on the agenda we have public comment, and I'm not aware of anyone who wishes to speak. So then moving on to the next agenda item for action. First, we have approval of the meeting minutes of the February 26, 2013 meeting. Do I have a motion for approval?
I so move.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The second action item, the amendment to the Code of Regulation, can be stricken. The Executive Committee today determined that that item was not necessary. This was the amendment to the Code of Regulations regarding
Remote attendance.
Remote attendance, thank you. Finance Committee appointments. We have, as far as the Finance Committee, we are retaining the members from 2012, and we need one additional person who I will appoint. So if any of you are interested in serving on the Finance Committee, please advise, and we will bring that back for approval. For discussion, today we have the NEOSCC team who will be working with us to review the scenario planning process and show us what they have done to date and how the process will work. I'd like to introduce or have them introduce themselves. Chris and...
I'm James Miner from NEOSCC, Principal in Charge. We'll be talking with you in a few minutes. This is Chris Horn, Project Manager and Planner.
Thank you and welcome. We will get to them later on the agenda. Next, we have the progress and status of the products. This is something that is, although running parallel with the scenario planning effort, still very, very critical to the organization. We have 4 basic products that we are working to bring to a certain level of completion by the end of the year, as well as preparing some launch of them for the future. And Sarah Meyer will give us an update on those products.
Good afternoon, everyone. You have all heard about the products, as Grace said, that are running in parallel to the scenario planning effort. These are tools that are going to be in place to help communities actually start moving towards the regional preferred vision that is ultimately selected. And so I just have up here as a refresher the definitions for each of the product areas. We have 4. There's the dashboard, which you'll be hearing a little bit more on later this afternoon. Policy recommendations. The policy recommendations are obviously a companion to the framework that's ultimately presented along with the preferred vision, and these are the things that need to change in order to...
See if you got the mic on.
Oh, sorry.
You got a low voice.
Sounds loud to me. Okay. Sorry about that. So again, these are the 4 product areas that run in tandem with the scenario planning process. They're designed to help the communities actually start achieving the regional preferred vision. So the dashboard is going to be presented by Joe McDonald in a few minutes. Policy recommendations go along with the preferred vision. These are the things that need to change in order to move forward as a region, or conversely, there are policies that need to be strengthened and protected that will be identified. The toolkit and best practices are some of those things that are actually on the ground that other communities in our area are starting to use to start implementing change. These could be simple from, model zoning codes and some of the best practices like stormwater remediation techniques that communities have going right now that we can learn from each other. And so the purpose of the toolkit is to put all these resources into one place so that it can be a tool for our members and the region to use going forward. And pilots, we spoke about a little bit in the executive committee session this morning. Pilots are those things that have not been proven to be best practices yet, but that have promise. And so there are pilots that are going on right now within the region and across the country that we're looking at to see, should they be applied here, should they be replicated, and then also what are some possible pilots going into the future that could get the support of consortium members to be led by them or to receive additional funding. And to keep you all in the loop, since there is a lot of information that's bouncing back and forth and a lot that's being presented to you on a regular basis, we're trying to simplify how you learn about the products and keep abreast of what's going on. So on a rotating basis for the rest of the grant term, we're going to be doing kind of a little bit deeper dive on each of the products to give you a status update. And so this is the general schedule for the products when you'll be hearing about them. Today you're going to hear more about the dashboard and the progress that's been made in that area. April, we're leaving to just be scenario planning because we have a lot on the agenda for next month. And then next up you'll hear in May about pilots, and schedule goes forward on a rotating basis. So also here is an activities look ahead calendar for the products to let you know what is planned. There is still opportunity for people to become involved if they want to be on a working group for any of these areas, and schedule of some of the meetings that are planned and just the general tasks that are going to be accomplished in the 3-month look ahead. So that is just a basic rundown of the products, and I would like to first ask if there are any questions. Okay, then I'd like to introduce Joe McDonald. He is going to give more of an in-depth discussion of where the dashboard is.
Well, good afternoon. Whoa. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for your attention. If you don't know who I am, I'm one of the project managers with the consortium. My name is Joe McDonald, and I am the manager for developing a dashboard of regional indicators for Northeast Ohio. 5 months ago, I stood in front of you and talked about the idea of a dashboard, and I related it to a dashboard in a car. The general principle is that the dashboard helps us to understand how we're progressing towards our preferred vision for this region. We don't have that vision yet, but that doesn't mean we can't start to think about the kinds of indicators and measures that may potentially be helpful to assess our progress. So today, I'm just going to talk about what has happened in developing the dashboard to date. I'll talk a bit about prior dashboard efforts that myself and the dashboard working group considered, guiding principles that we came up with at our first dashboard working group meeting on February the 28th, potential buckets of indicators. These are just possibilities that came out of looking at prior dashboard efforts and also talking to the working group members. And then an example of a potentially useful way of thinking about indicators and how they could be represented to both benefit public consumption and then possibly more detailed consumption for policymakers who need to go a little bit deeper into the details. And then finally, next steps, how we're going to move forward from this point over the next 3 months. So to date, I spent about 2 months between Christmas and President's Day weekend looking at not all of the dashboard efforts that have ever been attempted across the United States because we just don't have the time, but a range of dashboard efforts that were suggested to me that had taken place in Northeast Ohio, and then a sample of dashboard efforts that had occurred in places like Pittsburgh and Northeast Indiana and also San Diego, which was brought to our attention by folks at the fund. And February 18th, I put those together into a comprehensive matrix to give people an idea of what are the possibilities of dashboard indicators that we could consider. The staff reviewed it. Then I sent it out to the members of the working group. There were about 20 of them. They gave their review. We had a very good discussion at the first working group on February the 28th. Then I developed from their input a memo that looked at guiding principles that seemed to capture what they wanted in a dashboard. And also, they had asked me to look at putting together fairly broad buckets and about 3 to 5 just general indicators that could go within those buckets. Not specific measures, and they didn't even require me to ensure that data existed, but just what they felt would be good representative indicators for assessing the region's progress towards its future. And then on the 12th, I presented this update to the Technical Steering Committee. I got some feedback from them and some feedback from the working group, and so we went through another iteration, and I will shortly show you the output of those discussions. And then now I'm here talking to you about this. So I looked at 10 dashboards in fairly deep detail, including the brainstorming sessions that were composed by the work streams back in the spring of 2012. This came out of the development of the Conditions and Trends platform, and the different topic-based work streams sat down and started to ask themselves, okay, we put this data together on where we've been as a region and where we are now. What kinds of measures might be useful for assessing the state of our particular topic as we go forward in time? So we have that input. In the summer, HUD put out flagship indicators that they wanted regions to think about. We're not required to actually develop them, but they strongly urge us to consider looking at these indicators. And then dashboards that were done by the Fund for Economic Future, the Center for Community Solutions, Cleveland Sustainability Office, the Poverty Center at Case Western. Cuyahoga County is working on a green print. They have indicators for assessing environmental sustainability, and then the 3 communities that I talked about earlier. Okay, so I understand there's a lot of text. That's what Hunter told me. There's a lot of text going on here. I don't mean to go through each of these in detail, but I really would like you to review them and get back to me, because the purpose of this is really to give you a chance to weigh in on what we've come up with so far and offer your perspective. I would appreciate it. Just in the interest of time, you know, it's not really appropriate to go through and try to assess all of these right now. These are potential indicators. The real driver of what will be used to measure will come from the community engagement that we're going to go through over the next few months with the workshops at the end of April and beginning of May, and the crowd gauge instrument to assess what people in this region really care about, what they value, what they prioritize. But there's no reason why we can't start to think about and anticipate what may be important to measure to assess our region's progress. We have 7 buckets, you know, these broad, loosely defined topics that capture some of these major indicators: economy, environment, health, education, housing, what I call people, but you could also call demographics, and transportation. And Hunter also made the astute observation that this box is much bigger than the other boxes, and that doesn't actually mean anything. It doesn't mean health is more important or overshadows everything, although I think health is very important and that's why it's here. But we have, and I'll talk about this in a bit more detail about an example of how health was captured and how health also connected to some of these other buckets like population, education, economy, and the environment. Guiding principles, there were several, I think almost a dozen total, and I'm not going to go through them in detail, but the one I want to draw your attention to came up repeatedly, and that is we want to make sure that this product is digestible, for the public, but comprehensive enough for elected officials and policymakers who may want to get into more detailed data that supports the broader indices. And that is going to be a challenge, because a lot of the dashboards that we looked at were either one way or the other. You had dashboards that gave very general detailed information with grades and broad ranks, and then you had the other side where you had very detailed, very in-depth measures that looked at surveys, and they implemented regression analysis, looked at descriptive and quantitative statistics. So the group has told me that they really would like to find a way to try to integrate those two objectives, and I think there might be a way to do it. Emily Campbell, who is on my working group and sitting right here for the Center of Community Solutions, suggested one approach that has been done through a collaboration by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the University of Wisconsin Population Health Institute. This is simply called Community Health Rankings. And these Community Health Rankings, when you go to the website, if you just wanted to look at how counties in Ohio rank based on health outcomes or health factors, you can click on these tabs. And it's a different picture than what you're seeing here. It's a different page. This is actually a breakdown of their model. But you just click on those, and they give you, where your county ranks with a single number. And if that's all you care about, then you can leave that website and you're done. But if you want to know how the index of health outcomes or how the index of health factors was actually constructed, they provide this model and all of the data and the justification for these different indicators, and these are actually sub-indexes, and these are the actual indicators, and how they were weighted, and all of the data that supports. And the data, it becomes very detailed and covers a broad range. You have tobacco use, diet and exercise, alcohol use, all the way down to quality of healthcare, education, family and social support, environmental quality. And so this single broad index actually hits many of the different buckets that I showed you in a previous slide. And so this is a more comprehensive way to unpack the indexes that could be viewed for their face value if that's all you cared about, but also satisfies the curiosity of people who want to dig deeper. So that's just an example. Okay, next steps. So the immediate next step is to get your feedback on what I've presented to you and what I think has been distributed to you, and will also be available on the website. So I encourage you to go and look at the indicators, go and look at the buckets, tell me I hate this, I like this, change this, don't change that, fix this, don't fix that. I welcome your feedback. I think it's really important. And contact me directly. There's my email address, jmcdonald@neoscc.org, with your revisions, suggestions, comments, etc. And if you'd like to get involved more directly and participate in the working group, let me know as well. Then, while we're moving towards the scenario planning, community engagement workshops, and eventually crowd gauge, my job is going to look at these potential indicators within the buckets that I've showed you, aside from making your revisions that you might suggest. Start to think about where the data could be. Who has measured this before? Can we do this across the 12 counties? Where might there be gaps in what we're trying to do? And then to work with individual members of the working group, like I've worked with Emily, like I've worked with Shara Davis, to see, okay, what about this approach? Do you think this could be a way to measure it? And while we're thinking about measurement, how is it going to be visually displayed on the tool that eventually gets developed? So that concludes my update of the dashboard. Are there any questions? Joe, who's also a member of the working group.
I'm reacting to what Sarah had put up on the for the dashboard, and just wondered if there's a could there be an indicator that the public in the region indicates they don't want a change too. So you're more in a preservation mode as opposed to a change mode. Because what was indicated on this sheet is that it has to be sensitive to reflect change, must be able to cause change in policy or practice over the next 3 to 5 years.
Well, Joe, let me say that I think the description of the dashboard that was on the slide that Sarah presented was what I came into the initial working group with. If you recall from our meeting in February, I laid out these different, criteria that had been provided to me in a meeting I held back in October with folks at the fund, including Brad Whitehead, where we talked about what would be good measures of success for indicators. And then the group didn't completely get rid of those, but they thought, okay, but we don't want to limit ourselves too much, and we want to think about other things. Emily has talked about how in her work for NEO-RIO, that not all of the indicators that are important to a region are going to necessarily change that frequently year to year. But that doesn't mean that they're bad indicators or that we need to get rid of them. So I think it's just a discrepancy in the thought process, and perhaps that slide I need to update where we're going with this. But I think that was an original, this is our initial, hit at what the dashboard could be, and there's been an evolution by working with the working group folks like yourself and my own thinking and giving this to folks for review and feedback. Jason.
Joe, it sounded like going into this, you were not as worried about data yet, or where's the data going to come from, and it sounds like after this initial stage of kind of people vetting the indicators, probably move into the data collection phase next. Are there ways that we can all kind of help you with anticipating or gathering data, or is that going to be something that we can think about now and a more formal process later?
So you really have two things that you just said. The first I want to amend because I wouldn't say I wasn't worried about finding data. Finding data is always something that I worry about, every day of my life. But absolutely, the rest of what you said is correct. I will stop at nothing to get the data that I need, and anybody who's on the SASAKI team or in my office can tell you that I'm absolutely ruthless at finding data, and if I feel that AMETS has data, I will go to you, to Seth, to Kurt, anyone on your staff and try to get the data. So if the data's out there, we'll get it, and as Mary Scott said at the working group meeting in February, if the data's not there, this is a golden opportunity for an eager beaver, nonprofit, philanthropic organization to say, you know what, this is a great project for us, and we have some money, and we're going to do this. So, yes. Anyone? Yeah, Freddie.
I just wanted to comment about the health bucket being very large. I think you accurately reflect the fact that it should be that large.
Oh, okay.
Because one of the things
I just couldn't fit all the text into the bucket of the same size.
And Emily can attest to this also. I think that a large focus of this initiative and anyone's initiative that's doing anything that's community related, it's really about human impact. And I think now we're at a point where we can begin to measure human impact. Locally, we've done some work around looking at existing health status in communities to determine social, economic, and environmental interventions to change health status. So I think that having the health status aspect of this from a geographic standpoint is really what's going to let you know whether or not the investments that you're making, the policies that you're making, is really having an impact on quality of life.
Right, and then I think the other point is when I created this bucket, so to speak, on the slide, I looked at it and I thought, this is so much bigger, and yet this bucket is starting to capture things that are going on here.
Everywhere.
Here. Yeah, I mean, whereas the others are more siloed, just from my own, sense of simplicity. This, especially as it was portrayed by Community Health Rankings, really starts to touch on other groups of indicators. So you can't really just separate them out, and we're going to have to figure out a way we can successfully integrate these indicators together into a comprehensive index. Is there? Oh, Lucy, yes.
I'm Lucy Miller. I'm with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development.
I don't know whether we're going to see any funding for 2013, but I would have to say that the data that's going to be found from these indicators are what's being utilized for ranking factors on varying applications for grants.
And Lucy, I'll also add that even though the HUD flagship indicators are not required, we are going to do them and put them into a report for this summer.
Well, effects of health are really becoming a major issue.
Oh yeah, yeah. Emily.
One quick thing, somewhat related, but the new county health rankings for this year were actually released last week. And in the day that Harvard had its big upset, Geauga County also perpetrated an upset and beat out Delaware County to be the #1 ranked healthy county in the state. So a little bit of good news for Northeast Ohio.
Yeah, absolutely.
Geauga.
Brad?
On this subject, next week, the University of Akron is sponsoring an all-day conference jointly with Lorain County Community College, I believe. So, Shara, you may have the details. But the Boston City Indicators Project is something that is kind of the granddaddy or grandmother of indicator groups. And the person who leads that will be leading a workshop next Wednesday at the University of Akron. Can anybody show up, or what's the deal, Shara? Do you know?
Yeah, I think
or just send Shara an email if you're interested.
Shara, I'll contact you about it if you think it's good for me to be there.
Maybe if you can just go ahead and send that information to the entire board.
About that?
Or have Shara send it.
Oh yeah, because I didn't even know about it until you said it, Fred. Fred?
But I do feel strongly about what your boxes are, because most of my career, this is what I've been talking about to the Urban League about in regards to quality of life. Health, if a person is not healthy, it's as simple as that. They're not healthy, they can't take advantage of any of these other things that surround that box. And so until we start to really focus in on that, and that people have to be healthy in their community for it to be a healthy community, and all this other stuff is kind of add-ons, because we do good with brick and mortar and all of that, and the people in the community are going to hell in a handbasket. You know what I'm saying? So I do feel that this will bear out as you continue to do your data collections that you do.
So Joe,
Big health is good.
Yeah, thank you very much for the work that you and your group have been doing. I think that what I like about the approach that you're putting forward is that it deals both with outcomes or longer term, as well as the strategic, as well as the tactical or the process oriented. So I think we're definitely on the right track.
And those are reflected in the guiding principles too.
Right, so I think that's fantastic. Keep up the good work. Keep bringing us back additional information and or requests for things. And we look forward to more updates.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And Hunter, are you going to talk about objectives? Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Yes. Thank you, Joe. Jeff and I will give you a brief update on the April objectives. And the April objective is driving traffic to the workshops. This is the schedule. I think you've all seen it. It's now in printed form, starting April 30th, May 1st and 2nd, in the Oberlin Inn for Lorain, Western Cuyahoga, and Medina counties. And then on the east side in JFK High School, which has come to us from the Diocese of Youngstown for the Eastgate, the 3 counties in the Eastgate area, Ashtabula, Trumbull, and Mahoning. May 1st, we're going to have a session in Cleveland at Third Federal Savings and Loan on the Slavic Village neighborhood for the city and the inner ring suburbs, and also at the Metropolitan Center where we met last summer in Canton for Stark and Wayne counties. And then on May 2nd, we will be here, the Urban League, for Stark and Portage counties, and then at Community College East for Eastern Cuyahoga, Geauga, and Lake counties. Now, we've made it very clear to folks that the boundaries are soft between these. People will live in one place, work in another, whatever makes sense to come. But the major objective this month, and your major objective working with us through your networks, is to make sure your people representing your community are at these meetings. And so with Patty Chobe and the Cobalt Group taking the lead on our network of networks, with Jeff and our strategies and our MPO directors reaching out to the elected officials. Again, I would urge you to stay focused on this and plan to be at these meetings where we will be going through the scenario planning work. The major April objectives are regional planning, scenario planning, and the fiscal impact. A lot of work is going into preparing for the workshops, as you can see, we have reached out across Northeast Ohio. Most of the spaces are donated. The finalizing the business as usual model, and that will be that's the major objective of this meeting today, is to introduce you to that. Finalizing also the fiscal impact model. As we indicated, the thing that differentiates this from a planning process is that there's dollars and cents involved. The whole idea here is to look at what business as usual, going out to 2040, doing in the future, what we've been doing in the past, and what's it cost us, and what's it cost our communities, and then what are the options and what are the costs and benefits and trade-offs there. To do that, we are generating, and we've got Joe, who is modest in saying he's dogged about getting data, working to gather the detailed information on our jurisdictions, our 400 jurisdictions in Northeast Ohio. The model is a detailed piece that ties back to those 1.8 million parcels of land that we have the land use and zoning information on. And finally, teeing up the phase 2 of our work plan. As you recall, we are doing the work plan development and detailing in phases. We agreed to the first phase in detail in January, with the understanding that as we end that first phase, we turn to the second phase work plan and then the third phase work plan. Many of you participated, and I want to thank you for your work in getting us around in 1 week to, was it 13 meetings, 14 meetings? We were meeting all over the place. In each one of the 12 counties, we had an average, I think Anthony told me, of about 25 people a meeting for this type of very arcane work of assessments of impediments to fair housing choice. Our consultant indicated to us that our attendance was remarkable. He said, I did one round of meetings in LA County and had nobody come to the meetings. And I want to thank everybody on our board reached out to their constituents to get folks to come, and I think we had a good session. We got some interesting comments and feedback out of various counties, and we are continuing to, our consultant will continue to take that information and is proceeding on schedule to develop the findings and the recommendations. We are also asking people, we're keeping the online surveys open, so again, we're asking people to fill those out. Those are surveys that really talk about your experience in the fair housing, in the housing area in your area. And we are determining the internal review protocol. We have a tight timeline. We would like to reach out to board members who want to participate in that. In particular, there are some board members for whom the fair housing issue, and I'm thinking people like Don Romanchik over in Lorain County, who deal with this every day and can, I think, help our staff develop to review the final work product. You heard also from Sarah about the product development, and we've seen the first of the presentations. The Toolkit product group, which is headed by Anthony Kobeck, will get into gear. Anthony's been heading the AI work and developing also draft pilot criterias. We'll be working on that, and a policy needs briefing framework that Kelly Britt is working on. Communications and engagement, Jeff will talk in detail, but the key issue there is driving traffic to the meetings. We're looking to get 200 people and a cross-section of people from each one of our counties. 200 people at each one of the meetings would be the desired number to have the sort of sessions that we're planning for this. So let me turn it over to Jeff, unless there are other questions about our April objectives. Okay, Jeff.
Okay. As Hunter has said, really the priority in terms of communications and engagement over the next 4 to 5 weeks is driving traffic to these meetings. We opened registration on Friday. I'm glad to announce we already have about 20 registrants without doing a whole lot of outreach quite yet. But we're going to be doing a lot of outreach, which I'll talk about in a minute. Just to clarify, the save the dates that you got today don't have the actual locations on them, but they do have the link to the website that does have the actual locations. And later this week or early next week, you'll be receiving printed copies of this invitation as well, with all of the dates and locations and times. In general, we kind of took a look and said, relative to workshop outreach, there's a couple different categories of audiences that we're going after. First and foremost is the general public, which we're doing through a lot of different media channels, social media channels, traditional media channels, as well as through a lot of partner organizations, newsletters, and things like that. We talked a little bit about that at our February meeting, and that we're trying out some new tools for that, and hopefully we'll be able to share some of the analytics from those tools coming up, but a lot of that will be driven through traditional, social, and non-traditional media coming up over the next 4 weeks. The network of network list and Cobalt's work with Sasaki will really be focused on the network leaders list that Patty has been developing over the last 6 months, and the 1,700 other leaders that she's identified throughout the region. And that will be a very, intentional outreach through the network so that they're receiving the invitations via someone that they know, rather than it coming cold from us. But that is something that we have asked for a couple different reviews of that material, and we could provide it still if you want to take a look at that and see who should be identified as network leaders. We'll be reaching out through our traditional Northeast Ohio Sustainable Communities mailing list, the constant contact tool that goes out to about 1,700 people. We'll also be sending out letters to state legislators, mayors, and township trustees throughout the 12 counties, authored by Hunter and the respective MPO director for that area. So if you have other people that you would like us to send official letters to, let us know. We are going to be doing some additional letters down the line. Board organizations and networks, which I'll get to in a second, in terms of some of the tools we'll be providing you for your network lists. Workstream members will be reaching out through the PMO, both in terms of attendees, to be volunteers, as well as be conduits to bringing people to the meetings. And then the media will be doing through most of our work with our strategy and building off some of the editorial board meetings that we've had in the last couple months. At the February meeting, we mentioned the beginning of the editorial board sessions. I can say that we've had great meetings with the Akron Beacon Journal, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, the Vindicator, and Crane's Cleveland Business. We are still waiting confirmation on a couple dates from the Canton Repository, as well as the 2 Lorain County newspapers. And then we'll be diving into some of the smaller weeklies that are out there. But I think, and Hunter and Fred Wright and Jason and Grace and Steve Hambley and Mark Moore and people that have attended these meetings, John Getchy, could speak to the fact that I think there was a great deal of interest in what we're doing and some great questions about what we're doing. And I think in most instances we felt like there was support for it, and we'll be looking to see and following up with them about editorial support in the coming weeks before the workshops themselves. So there's still some to be scheduled, but I think so far the meetings have gone rather well. Last week we also launched a media network advertising campaign through the Cleveland.com network, which is actually misnamed because it's the network of all the daily papers throughout Northeast Ohio, so you might start to see ads about us there, in banner ads or in side clip ads. We've also started to do some experimenting with Google AdWords and Google advertising and Facebook advertising, and we will be adding some other outlets, more traditional media outlets, in the month of April. So what can you do to help us move this forward? I think at the last meeting, Grace spoke very passionately about getting the board involved, and I said maybe every board member brings 10 people, and some people said maybe it should be 5. I still think all of you, I think there's 26 of you here today, can bring 10 people. I think that would be a respectable number. But we have developed, similar to the Conditions and Trends platform, a communications toolkit for your organization to use. I know a lot of times this doesn't fall on your responsibility, but I think there's other people in your organizations that it does fall on. Or, you know, Greg, it probably falls on yours solely at Policy Bridge to get this done. But the communications toolkit includes a PDF of a new overview piece that we'll be unveiling a little bit later. It's an overview piece of NEOSCC and Vibrant Neo. A couple different ad images for your website or your materials. JPEGs of the workshop invite that I mentioned. 100 to 500 word articles for your newsletters and other postings, sample email messages, sample Facebook posts, sample tweets, PDFs of the document you have today, what is scenario planning, and a sample press release. And we have set up some webinars, which I'll get to in a second, for your communications staff or for you to attend on 3 different occasions next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Probably a half-an-hour webinar for you to understand how to utilize those tools. One of the things that I think we've all struggled with in the last, at least since I've been here, a year and a half now, is that we haven't really had a strong overview piece about what it is we're doing and what the process is going forward. We have been working with our strategy and some internal reviews on a new folded overview piece that really focuses on the objectives of Vibrant Neo 2040, the organization, as well as how they can get involved with the upcoming workshops, the online media tool, which has had a name change since then, and some of the outputs, the dashboard, the toolkit, the policy recommendations, and the pilot programs. So this is something that we're going to wrap up and be printing later this week, and it'll be in a packet with the invites next week. It'll also be available for download online, but I think it walks through the process and makes people understand where they fit in the process and how their input into the process is so important. A couple other things, these are some of the ads you might start to see on cleveland.com. They'll also be in the communications toolkit, just some different sizes. So in the next 2 weeks, the things that you can do to help move this forward, as I said, we're going to be sending you the printed invites and overviews, which can be distributed within your office or sent out to some of your contacts. A formatted email invite was just sent to you. Unfortunately, it wasn't because my email's not working, but you will be receiving after this meeting an email invite that you can just cut and paste into your own email and send it out to your contacts. A communications toolkit, which will also be emailed after this meeting. Make sure that that gets to your appropriate staff person. And then asking your staff person to participate in the toolkit webinars on April 2nd and 3rd and 4th. We added a third one. And all that information will be embedded in the 2 emails that you'll receive later today. One is numbered number 1 in the subject line. One is numbered number 2 in the subject line. And again, please let us know if you have any questions. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Patty to talk about how we're going to stir up some volunteers and facilitators for the upcoming events.
I will make myself available after the meeting for anybody who does have questions, but our team from NEOSCC is really anxious to get started on their part. So if you haven't heard from me about the list that we've been asking you to review, you're going to hear from me again one more time. And again, if you have specific questions about it, I'll be here after the meeting to talk to you specifically. And I want to thank everybody who already approached me as they were walking in the door. So with that, James and...
Can I just finish up here? I just need to finish up.
Oh,
was there any questions? I know we breezed through this quick. Yeah. We're counting on you all.
Yes, I will reiterate my passion from the last meeting that I think the best way to get other folks involved is to have our excitement, our enthusiasm, our passion expressed out there in the community, and request our friends, families, and colleagues to join us in this effort. And they might even be surprised that they'll have fun while they're doing it. With that, thank you very much, Jeff, for your work and for the update. Thank you, Hunter.
Lucy had a question.
Oh, Lucy?
Please do not forget all the colleges and universities, because I think we've been missing them.
Okay. I did want to say real quick on your way out, we do have copies of the Western Reserve Land Conservancy's recent report, Common Ground. I attended one of the sessions on this, and there was, I think, 4 or 5 other board members there from our organization. So I thought it would be good to share the report. Some of the data and maps in it are familiar from our Conditions and Trends platform, but they'll be available at the table on your way out.
Thank you. Moving on the agenda, we have the standing committee reports as well as organizational reports in your packages. Are there any questions on those items? Hearing none. Moving on to old business. Just going ahead.
Yeah, Madam Chair, these are here as a reminder. As Emma Barcelona pointed out, we are going to be starting our audit in about a month. We need your designated primary and alternate representatives, and also both need to have filed the conflict of interest forms. Kelly Harris will be in touch with you if you haven't, and please respond. We don't want an audit finding on that. Finally, one thing that wasn't on this, we discussed in the executive committee. We are getting, and we anticipate getting, additional public information requests from constituents. We have an organized process by which to respond to those. Emma Barcelona is our key point of contact. If you have if there are questions that we need to follow up on, please refer them to Emma, and we will handle them appropriately. And I think then that turns us to the scenario planning update, and I'd like to introduce James Miner from Sasaki to bring us up to date on scenario planning. This is in anticipation of what will be happening at the upcoming workshops.
Okay, thanks, Hunter. Thank you, everyone. Happy to be here in person, if for no other reason than to prove to you that we at Sasaki actually do exist as people. We've been quite busy. We've been at this for about 3 months, which is a quarter of our process. And I realize that you all, or most of you, have been at this for 2 years and 3 months. So you're 3/4 of the way through. And I understand there's a lot of interest in understanding where we're at. We have been moving very quickly on multiple fronts, and the good news is that this meeting is well timed actually for us to provide you some updates on all of the work that we've been doing and allow you all the chance to provide some input on where we are going to go with a lot of this information. We do want to engage everybody in a bit of an exercise. We're going to do an upfront presentation. You've noticed the boards on your way in, I'm sure. We're going to ask all of you to take a look at these maps. The presentation is going to give you a sense of the methodology that went into creating those maps. But we do want to engage everybody in an interactive exercise to get your feedback on what you see in front of you. And for anyone else who's interested, and I know some of you were planning on attending tomorrow, we're having a similar workshop tomorrow morning at the RTA Cleveland. What time are we starting?
We're starting, I think, at 9, but people need to be there at 8:30 because of the security clearance.
So starting at 8:30. If anyone wants to attend tomorrow, we'd certainly welcome that. We're going to have a broader representation from our consultant team at that meeting as well. But diving in, so where are we in the process? We have essentially a 3-phase process divided into equal parts. We're up front here in this orange section, looking at the business as usual scenario, which is to say what will happen, what will the future of the region look like if we continue to do things the way that we do them as we do today. That's a very informative process. It gives us a lot of really good information about what the future might look like. It also gives us the opportunity to identify priorities that people want to measure the impacts of in looking at alternate futures for the region. Those alternative scenarios comprise the second phase, and the final being a preferred scenario, which is the third phase of work, which moves into implementation, all of that by the end of the year. So here we are. We have workshops scheduled kind of at the intermediate stages between all of them. The final major community workshops happen before the end of the year so that we can get feedback on the preferred scenario before we do move into implementation of that preferred scenario. So just to review what the scenario planning process looks like, what it's all about. Some examples from Des Moines. I'm sure some of you are getting tired of hearing about Des Moines. Believe it or not, I'm tired of looking at these maps too. It is a recent, relevant example of a regional planning process and scenario planning process that we've done, and at this stage I think is still useful for us to understand and look at. What you see here were the 4 scenarios that were developed in Des Moines, and I think it will allow all of you to understand better what you can expect for this region. At first glance, there's not a whole lot to look at other than some colors on the map, but let me help you interpret what you're seeing. The one on the top left is the business as usual scenario. And what you can see that's different about that map than the others is a lot more orange. That orange in this case represents suburban residential growth. So sprawl in that region is a major issue. When we look at this one on the top right, we can see that a very simple switch in how we envision the future has quite a dramatic impact. The business as usual scenario accepts current practices in zoning. So does the one on the right. It just shows a preference for density. So if we develop at the higher range of densities allowed by current zoning, you see a dramatically different picture. On the lower left, we consolidated all of the current comprehensive plans for each community within the region to see what that would look like. What's interesting about that is it raises the issue of competition across the region. Each community has a plan for what they think they can capture in terms of employment and population growth. But when you put them all together and you project the actual employment and household growth across the region, you very quickly see that there's not enough to fill up all of those plans across the region, and you have to make some trade-offs to see regional progress and collaboration. And then finally, a preferred scenario, which was based on all the input and feedback that the community provided after looking at each one of these scenario outcomes. Beyond the maps, they aren't just pictures. We can query these maps. They're a GIS database. We can look at the data behind them and tell stories with that data. And we can tell any number of stories that we want based on the priorities of the region that we want to test. So in this case, looking at parks and conservation acres per capita, or sprawl, and the differences in sprawl for each scenario as we can measure them, as the diagram indicates. So what does it all mean? How can that be helpful to you? This really is a learning process. The scenario plans are not plans, they are scenarios. They are meant to be a tool for learning across the region. This process for all of 2013 really is about learning. The scenarios teach us a lot. They allow us to build capacity so that as we do move into implementation in the following year and the consultants all go away, there's a team of people with all the tools they need to carry the plan forward and actually implement the recommendations. So acting in post-2013, learning in 2013. So the goals for this exercise, we need to get the big issues on the table and prioritize them. I think as you're going to see as we look at some of the maps that are here and what went into them, there's some pretty significant issues that I think will generate a lot of discussion. This process affords us the opportunity to really get at those issues and talk about how those issues affect individual priorities for each and every person throughout the region. We want to experiment with a range of strategies and test the impact and effectiveness of those strategies on how they can impact the future of the region. And down the road, we want to incent local authorities and communities to act in a way that is consistent with the regional vision. So this is not a policy, this is not a mandate. This is a regional vision with incentives that will align local community goals with the regional plan. So drilling down a bit now through the first workshop series in terms of the work that's been done and will be done. This shows you the kind of thing that we'll be showing at the first workshop. So we'll be comparing what the existing condition today is on the ground compared to the business as usual trend, looking ahead to the year 2040, and all of the metrics that go along with that. We're going to, as a baseline for generating the business as usual scenario, it's a projection forward of current trends of both growth and decline. We're going to assume the same housing mix, the same employment mix, and also that the zoning and development patterns that exist today will continue into the future. So that really is the basis for the business as usual model, and we'll paint that picture. Aside from just looking at land use and land consumption or abandonment, all of those things will be included. We can also do some thematic mapping. This is again an instance from Des Moines, where flooding was a major issue there. So you see on the left the current condition, red obviously not a good condition for flooding, and projected forward into the year 2050 in this case, the impact of that business as usual scenario on flood risk throughout the region based on those land use decisions. Again, we can do more than just using the maps. We can tell stories through the data as well, in this case looking at demographic shifts and trends towards different age groups within the demography of the region. When we actually get to these workshops, they're going to be highly interactive. There's going to be presentations like this so that people can understand our methodology and what they're looking at on some of these maps. But we're also going to have breakout sessions. We're going to ask people to draw on maps, put stickers on maps, to engage in conversations about what they see on the maps. We're going to have methods for collecting instant feedback and polling from the audience, so as they see things on the screen, they can react to them in real time, so we can collect that data based on what they're feeling when they're being presented with this information. And we also hope to get into some real value discussions so that people from different areas throughout the region can talk about their priorities and compare their views and viewpoints to others in the community as well, and ask those groups and discussion groups that are being part of those breakout group exercises to report back on what they've discussed. As you've heard Hunter and Jeff talk about, there's a lot of work being done to promote those workshop events. We're also working very hard with Patty and others to drive attendance to those meetings, so there's a lot of progress being made there as well. So the goals for the workshop: communicate the scenario process, how it works, insights into this region, find ways to gather instant feedback and get at the key value questions that are important to people as they look at this, and understanding our neighbors. Very important to understanding and getting people out of their own element to understand what matters to other people in the community. And very clearly, so what do you see? What do you like? What don't you like, and why? Those are the kinds of questions we'll ask. And what kind of future then would you like to see based on this presentation? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris to talk a little more about some of the other pieces that go into this process. Chris.
All right, thanks, James. So I'm Chris Horn. I'm a planner at Sasaki and also the project manager of the consultant team. Thank you all for your time. It's exciting to be talking to you in person. So right now, we are actually at an exciting moment of the process in this first phase, because we finally have a first draft of the business as usual scenario. And that's what's on the large maps on the side. And in a couple of minutes, we'll be doing an interactive exercise where you can actually approach the maps and leave comments and really look at a fine grain and see what's going on. But before we do that, I want to walk through the steps of how we got there. What goes into this? What does this mean? What is this scenario? What are some of the ingredients? So it's really a step-by-step process. The very first step, kind of the building blocks of this scenario and all the scenarios, are what we're calling the building types. So these are literally types of buildings that are in some cases, common across the United States. In other cases, they're more specific to Northeast Ohio. So, you can see a couple examples of what the building types are like, and we have images to go along with these, and there's several more that this step has been completed. There's several different categories of building types that we're looking at: mixed use, multifamily, so on and so forth, including vacancy, which is going to be an interesting one, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then what the model does is it takes each of those building types as kind of core building blocks and assembles them into what we're calling development types. So a development type is a collection of building types, and this is an example of a mixed income neighborhood. This is one of the development types. And it shows you underneath the building composition what the different percentage breakdowns are of the different building types. So actually, I want to ask Paul just to give a little bit more background on the kind of what went into this, and city architecture played a major role in the development of these. And this actually came out of a long process that preceded the scenario planning work. Paul, if you want to give a few comments.
Hello, everyone. I am Paul Holby with City Architecture. We're the Cleveland part of the component. We've got Cleveland, and we've got Boston, we've got Portland, and I'm not sure wherever else, but we're intensely collaborating with each other to do something marvelous here. I just want to say it's a great privilege as a product of this region, both my life and my business being here for 35 years, it's a tremendous thing to be involved in this energy and work with all of you. And I don't know very many of you. I hope to know all of you before this is over. Really, all I want to say is that we're part of the on-the-ground team. We're here, we live here. Our buildings, the planning work we do is throughout this region. And so as we look at things like development types, we work in the city of Lakewood. We understand it. We've done a master plan for the Main Street, so we can bring energy and ideas, insight, and even direction to this envisioning process that can lead us to the future, because this is about change, right? I mean, really, hopefully at one level, at the least level, it's about understanding change, and that's what we're going to do today. That's what these guys are going to tell you about. But as we build, it's going to be maybe about managing change, maybe even directing change, and ultimately envisioning our future together. That's really marvelous. So we're looking at these development types relative to mixed income neighborhoods, things that we covet. We all, especially in our established communities, want to believe that we have the ability to mix housing and job producing businesses and commercial together to create the kind of wonderful 21st century communities like college towns and things built around hospitals. These are our future. This is where the growth is occurring or has the capacity to occur in Northeast Ohio. So with that, I will pass it back to Chris.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I mean, I just want to underscore, I mean, the depth and the nuance that we've gotten from our local partners with this aspect of the work has been incredible. I mean, it's so much more customized to what we normally see in other places in terms of understanding the building types and the development types. It's been really great, and I think it provides a really good foundation for the model to be very contextualized to Northeast Ohio and respond to some of the unique development conditions that are here. So when you see colors on the map today, those colors represent development types. That's what we're painting with on the map. So the third step, and this is kind of a sort of a technical background piece, but we basically took the entire study region, which is huge, and we dropped a grid over it. And there's two different sizes of grids. There's a 2.5 acre grid in the built areas and a 40 acre grid in unbuilt areas. And so on the bottom right, you see an example from downtown Youngstown where we're using a 2.5 acre grid. It's built out. And then the image on the top right just shows, I think this is near Youngstown, but it shows just what the transition looks like from the model's perspective as you switch. So any of the painting is going to occur basically within these grids, and it's going to be painting development types into those grids. That step's also been completed. This kind of puts it all together. So this is actually the interface that we see when our team is creating one of these scenarios. So you can see on the left, it's probably too small to read from where you're sitting, but that's a palette of the development types. Those are the same colors that you see on the maps. Those are the things that you're painting with. You see the grids here. And any of these colors that are showing up on this example, those are the things that are on the map, and the maps are just zoomed out more. But that's the process, basically, of actually designating different development types within these polygon areas. But how do we know where to put them? Like, how do you decide what goes where? So the first cut, and this is the next step, is basically dividing everything into two categories: developable and constrained. And the constrained areas can be constrained for one of two reasons: either they're currently built out, or there's building is not permitted or not possible for biophysical reasons. Maybe the slope is too steep, or there's surface water, or it's conservation, or whatever. For some reason, it's constrained. For everything else that's left over, what we're calling the developable land, we look at a number of factors, some of which I'll show you in a minute, but things like census trends, current land use, transportation infrastructure is a major driver of new development. Regional assets, zoning. Our team took an in-depth look at the transportation plans that are currently on the books and the projects that are funded, and extrapolated those out to the future. So we're actually modeling within a projected future transportation network, not necessarily just the infrastructure that's on the ground today. But anything that was included has to be something that is definitely funded, definitely going to be built, because this is the business as usual scenario. So some of the alternative scenarios we can start getting into, what if we build a BRT here, a light rail there? That's more in the alternative scenario territory. So this step has also been completed. So this is just a sequence of maps that show some of the constraints. In this case, these are some of the environmental constraints. So you can see surface water and riparian areas, and then you add wetlands, slopes greater than 25%. There's not a whole lot showing up there, but some near Akron. Parks and open space. And this is all cumulative, and it leads to this, which is, in the business as usual scenario, which areas are eligible to receive new development types and which ones are not. And so the pink ones are constrained for some reason, regulatory, biophysical, whatever, and the green areas are eligible to receive new development. And these are some of the other factors that I mentioned earlier. So the transit network, existing land use, zoning. We also, the census was a very, very important input for our business as usual scenario. I'm going to get into more detail in a second, but we used the census trends over the last several decades to establish at the tract level which areas have been gaining households and which areas have been losing households, as well as which areas have been adding jobs and which areas have been losing jobs, down to a pretty high level of detail for the actual sector types within. So it's not just all employment, but we're actually looking in trend changes in different some of the different NAICS code job composition within these census tracts. Okay, so the next step. Some of you have heard a little bit about this, is the abandonment methodology. We felt like abandonment is a major issue in the region. Vacancy is an issue. We need to address it. We need to understand it. We need to understand where it's happening, what the magnitude is like. So we actually dedicated a significant amount of time just focusing specifically on this issue to be able to incorporate it into the scenarios. So what are we talking about when we say abandonment? We're talking about abandoned structures, like on the left, or vacant lots, like on the right. So it's pretty specific. That's what we're talking about. And this is a simple kind of comic diagram to explain how we're thinking about this. So let's say you have a scenario where 2012, current day, you have 2 houses, 2 families. 2040, some stuff happens. Someone from the blue family gets married to someone from the red family. Some people pass away. Some people leave the region. A new family shows up. But when you look at this on balance, we're saying units minus the households equals what's left over, the abandoned or vacant. So what happened between 2012 and 2040 in this hypothetical? 2 new units were built on the top. There's 1 net new household. So there's 1 unit of abandonment left over. So that's the basic concept behind what we're looking at.
Before you go on to that, I think one of the things we needed to develop here is a way of looking at this. So we pulled together an expert team which included our colleagues at CSU and YSU who have dealt with this in detail. Tom Finnerty at YSU, Tom Beyer and Mark Salling at CSU. And have worked very closely also with our technical steering committee, both on the census and economic projections, and then on the abandonment methodology. I believe, Chris, this is the first such effort across a region of this scale. There are efforts going on in tracts and communities to project abandonment. This is the first one where we look at the consequences of essentially a no-growth area in terms of net population, the growth of units, abandonment at the other end, and how do you project those out? So we have relied on in depth on about 40 years worth of experience in the 2 universities and the communities that experienced the abandonment challenge most profoundly. And I do appreciate the Sasaki teams and the Ferganese teams work with us, because this has been very much a collaborative effort back and forth to see how this works, and then to field test it and play it out on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, certainly for this kind of modeling at the regional level, at this scale, this is the first time that we know of that anybody has ever done something like this. And not only are we trying to model it physically, but as you'll see later, we're also trying to understand what the financial implications of this are, both in terms of losing tax base, but also demolition costs, and just really understanding this from several different perspectives and trying to make that an important part of understanding these scenarios. Oh yeah, sorry.
I wanted to ask you this, Hunter. Was that suburban versus urban? Was the new units in the urban areas and the abandoned ones in the urban? I mean, in the suburban areas.
That's how it plays it out. But as Tom Barry said, I've studied this for 40 years, and it basically comes down to the rule of supply and demand. If you are building new units and not growing households, you have surplus housing. In Northeast Ohio, in each one of our metros, the pattern has been for the last 50 years to start at the core and move out. Whether it's Akron or Cleveland or Youngstown or Warren, it's the oldest is generally in the core, and the newest is at the edge. That does not mean you couldn't accommodate the desire for new in other locations in neighboring suburbs of the core, but we haven't. And Tom has also said, sort of boiling down a life's worth of work, regardless of race, class, or ethnicity, households will generally move from older to newer if they have the opportunity. So if the newer is at the edges, the movement is towards the edges. If there's newer somewhere else, like we're seeing in University Circle and downtown and in modest ways in other places, people will do that. But it's the simple analysis of supply and demand. We are building housing to meet changing needs, but we have not grown. And we do see some growth in households because households are getting smaller. But the number of households exceeds the number of units available, leading to surplus, and the oldest is at most risk, which tends to be in the oldest communities, which tend to be at the core.
So the question is, where does this happen in the scenario? So we looked at probably a half dozen or more different factors to try to understand what kinds of location experience this phenomenon and at what levels, and ultimately we decided on one that's pretty straightforward. This is literally straight trend from the census, using 1990 to 2010 data, which areas lost households during that period of time, and how many households did they lose, and we're just trending that out into the future. So it's direct, as straightforward of a trend as you can possibly get. So the darker the red or brown area you see, the more severe the abandonment has been. And so in the business as usual scenario, we just continue that trend forward. So these are the places, and it's happening at a tract level. So that part has been completed. And you'll be able to see that when you look at the maps called out as a separate section of the legend. There are abandonment development types that appear on these maps, so you can actually see where the abandonment is occurring, alongside of the other all the other land use changes on the map. So that deals with the question of where, and then we also needed to understand how much, how many people are we expecting, how many jobs. I mentioned that was based on the census. So we actually went through and for every one of the key variables, we did a trend for each one of the counties. So all the trends are at the county level, and then you can see, I'm going to flip through a series of charts, and then you can see kind of the aggregate change per decade over here on the right. So you can see the net population change, employment change by decade, household change, building permits. This is how we're understanding how many new units are being built. We're trending out the building permits. And then the abandonment is basically that's that kind of cartoon I showed a minute ago. So if I go back, so 100, anywhere between the mid 80s to 100,000 new units being built per decade. And then if you go back, there's about 40,000 new households. So you just take the difference between those. and you get about 60,000 per decade of abandonment. And a lot of that's churn, regional churn, right? It's like people that live in one place, newer house gets built, so they move to the newer house, and then they leave the older house behind. So that's kind of the magnitude of what we're talking about. Yeah, Jason.
So you mentioned 60,000 per decade, roughly. So we're talking over the life of where we're looking out to maybe like 150,000 abandoned properties.
Yep. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Sure. Okay, so those are the forecasts, and that part has also been completed. Almost there. Almost ready to show you the business as usual scenario, but there's a few things to keep in mind that are really important. This is the first draft, so there's a reason why we scheduled it to have a draft by this date, even though the workshop isn't until the end of April, because we know, especially a region of this size and complexity and variation, we know that we're not going to get it perfect the first time. And that's part of the reason why we're here today. We want to hear your feedback, get your comments on the initial first draft of this pattern. So this is the first draft, and our intention is to continue to refine this and develop this from now until the workshop. We chose a cartography for this to be to give you a direct view into the model. This isn't necessarily what we're going to show at the workshops. This isn't necessarily how we're going to symbolize the different categories. We may not even show them in those categories at all. Usually what we do is abstract everything up to a smaller set of land use categories, just so it's easier for the public to understand. If you have 12, 15 categories, sometimes it's kind of hard to tell the difference between the colors or keep track of everything. So we wanted to try to get this as accurate as possible. We didn't spend a ton of time trying to make it beautiful or organize the categories in a certain way. We just wanted to show you what it is we're dealing with, get comments on it. But there is, a significant portion of this process down the road that's going to be dedicated to thinking about how to package this and best communicate it to the public. So that's forthcoming, but not the focus of today. We talked a lot within our team about conservation and open space, how to deal with it. In this current draft of the business as usual scenario, there's not an explicit open space and conservation development type, but we went back and we looked at the trends, and there has been a significant trend of conservation within the last 30 years, enough so that we feel like we should incorporate it into the scenario. So it's not on the map today, but it's something that we're looking at, and we want to get in there before the workshop. Okay, so here it is. This is the current conditions, and then you get overlaid the different categories representing the change. All the stuff that pops out in the foreground is new development types, and for the most part, those development types represent new construction, mixed use, retail, hotel, offices. Again, you'll see them on the maps. You can see the legend and understand what all the categories are. There is a set, there's four, the kind of gray scale colors representing abandonment, and currently they're represented in sort of four different intensities. We're calling them transitional low up to very high. So those just represent degrees of abandonment within a neighborhood. So obviously this part of it is in progress, and this is something that we want to get your comments on today. Quick, just high level sort of takeaway, some patterns that we noticed. I mean, we literally finished this draft last week, so we're just now in the process of starting to digest it and understand what's going on. One of the clear patterns that maybe isn't surprising, this is Youngstown, so there's a lot of loss of housing units in the urban core. And on the flip side, you're seeing a lot of new suburban and large lot growth happening on the urban fringe. One other, before we jump to the maps, and I guess I'll go through this really quickly, but it's just worth mentioning. James talked about the other things that you get out of this. It's not just the maps, but you get, there's tables, there's charts, there's quantitative information. So we think of all those things as indicators, right? And Joe talked about the dashboard, same concept. This is the dashboard for the maps, basically, for the spatial data that we create. There's a lot of indicators we can measure. In this particular case, the fiscal impacts are of significant importance, and they're being stressed as the main indicator that we want to look at. So we're actually building an entire fiscal impact model to process the results that we're getting from this process, to understand what are the budgetary implications of these patterns that you're seeing on the map. So this is still in development. We don't really want to go have a detailed review of this today, but it's just worth mentioning as kind of a progress update. So we adapted a tool that's used by the Federal Reserve Board. It's called their FIT model, their fiscal impact tool. We customize it so that the inputs to the model are the spatial pattern that we create. And then you'll see, I'll show you a little bit what the outputs look like. We're about in the middle phases of development. Local calibration is possible. When I say local, I mean at the township, municipality level. But the good thing about this, up front, we were a little concerned about the number of municipalities and if it'd be possible to really calibrate the model according to all the different budgetary nuances. The good thing about this is there's a fallback. So if we don't have local calibration for whatever reason, if the data doesn't exist or the quality doesn't support the model or whatever, there's county numbers already built into this model provided by the federal government that we can use as a fallback. One of the things I mentioned before, we want to add demolition costs into this. We think that's going to be really interesting to see. It's not in the FIT model, but it's something that if we're looking at a significant rate of abandonment, then we have to start making assumptions about demolition, at what rate that's going to occur and how much it's going to cost. So this is over basically the input screen. Sorry if it's hard to read, but on the left you see the kind of non-spatial calibration where you get the county, property tax rate, annual retail sales, sales tax rate, utility franchise fee, so on and so forth. So all your kind of local calibration, local budgetary inputs. On the right is where you start inputting the scenario, the spatial pattern. You start saying how many acres of this, how many acres of that, how many square feet of this, how many square feet of that, and we make assumptions about what the revenues are from an additional square foot of retail in X county or X city. And so it's all built into there, and it takes the spatial output as its input. So then you look at revenue, and you look at expenditures, both on the capital side as well as operating costs, and it's pretty expansive. Deals with education, police, fire, parks and rec, sewage, utilities. I mean, it includes a lot of categories. So ultimately what you get is a balance sheet per scenario, per geographic unit of reporting, and say, this is the condition today, this is your revenue, this is your expenditure, this is your condition in the scenario. So just an overview that we're working on this, it's in progress, but that's one of the things that we're taking a look at. And again, all the county level data is already built into this, which is really a nice safety net if for some reason we can't get every piece of local data for every municipality in the study region. There won't be a gap. We'll still be able to make a reasonable calculation. So that's in progress. That's the main indicator. The fiscal impact is the primary indicator. We also intend to look at several other indicators. These are just some examples. A lot of these are built into the scenario modeling architecture. And we're grouped out in transportation, fiscal, sustainability, livability, smart growth. These are just examples of the kinds of things that we want to quantify as a response to the spatial pattern that we get. That's on the horizon. We're about to get there. Okay, so overview. A lot of work to date. You've seen all this stuff now. So building types, development types, model grid, development factors, abandonment methodology, forecast. All of that stuff's done. In progress, there's a business as usual spatial pattern, fiscal impact model. On the horizon, conservation and open space is a new development type. Indicators other than fiscal, cartographic representation, and thematic mapping. And this is just a general timeline. Some of the major deliverables pulled out. You can see the blue is kind of the review period. So we're fully now into the review period. This right now is a review of the business as usual spatial pattern. Fiscal model, basically the same time frame. Indicators are a little bit of lag time, and then some time for the workshop materials once we get closer to the middle of April. So that's kind of an overview of what the process is going to be like. Okay, so this leads us to the interactive exercise. So what we've done is we've printed large format versions of the business as usual scenario. And there's one map, way on the side that shows all 12 counties all together. But then we thought it would be easier for you to see what's going on if we zoomed in a little bit below the sort of macro regional level. So we're using what we've heard is the 3-4-5 convention. This is what that means. And so you know, the maps closest to me, the 3 closest to me are the 5 area for Cleveland, the ones in blue. And then the 4 are kind of the middle set of maps with the Akron Metro. And the 3 are the kind of greater Youngstown metro area. So for each of these zoom-ins, we have 3 copies of the map. So we have 3 for Cleveland, 3 for Akron, 3 for Youngstown, and then the far one is the overall regional map. So what we want you to do, there's a table of clipboards in front of all the maps. And so everybody grab a clipboard. I don't think there's enough clipboards for everybody, but we do have extra sheets of paper for the feedback. And we also have stickers, and the stickers are numbered. So grab some stickers, and basically what we're looking for is feedback on the pattern that you see, most importantly related to the accuracy of what's there. I mean, you know, if you have comments about sort of value interpretation of what you see, does this look good, does this look bad? I mean, that's interesting, and we do want to hear those things, but I think at this stage of the process, since we still have another month to go, we really want to understand, you know, does anything really not look right to you, or is there something on the map that you think is like a major project on the horizon, or something that's happening that we're really not picking up on, that's not showing up on the map? Those are the kinds of things that we want to know about. So, so take a sticker, and the stickers have numbers on them, and for each number there's 2 stickers. So it's pretty straightforward. So you take like sticker number 1. Put it on a map where you have a comment, and then take your sheet and put the other sticker number 1 on your sheet and just write whatever your comment is. And so we have a bunch of clipboards. If you don't get a clipboard, there's a stack of comment sheets separate, stickers over there, and go to it. We'll be around to answer questions. I don't know, Sarah, or Hunter, do we have the rest of the
land use planner in this room? So when I'm looking at this map, say in Cleveland, in the Cleveland area, you got gray, you got yellow, and this is for 2040. 2040. This is showing conditions that the business as usual suggests in that area. What's gray mean?
Gray is the abandonment and vacancy. So there's 3 or 4 different shades, and they just represent shades of severity. You can basically just think of it as like low levels of abandonment all the way to the entire neighborhood is just totally vacated.
But that's not telling me everything is going to disappear there by 2040, but it's showing the level of threat, basically, of a likelihood of abandonment or weakening.
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on how you interpret it. What it is literally is just an extrapolation of the census, right? So it's just saying this area lost this many households over the last 30 years. So if that continues, this is how many households will be lost over the next 30 years.
So now I'm going down to Medina County. It's got a lot of yellow on it, even if I can see from here. The yellow is that's like residential development of some sort? Okay, and that's showing areas which are likely to experience that sort of residential development in the next 30 years based on the pattern of the last 20?
Exactly, yeah. So any of the colors that show up on these maps represent new development. Everything represents change. There's no current, like if there's yellow on the map over there, currently there might be agriculture or some undeveloped use, basically. So this is all transformation. Yeah, Jason.
So Chris, what you're getting at is like if we see yellow and we think that looks weird that there would be a lot of development at that location, we put a comment, and then you want us to put our contact information maybe or something so you guys can follow up on the comment if it's detailed?
Yeah, I mean, if any, you know, for those of you that are comfortable putting that information, that's great. You know, the more information we have to be able to connect the comment to a person, that helps us, and we can, you know, get in touch. And, you know, we will systematically collect all of the comments and go through all of them and look at them and go back and look at the spatial pattern and revisit it. Or, you know, like, you know, if you say, oh, I know there's a new interchange coming in at whatever street in this place, and there's going to be a major new commercial development or mixed use development, and I don't see it on your map, and it's something you should be aware of. It's like that kind of stuff. Or, yeah. So Do we have the rest of the time? How much time do people have for the exercise?
What, our meeting's scheduled to go until what time? 3? So
we got about half an hour.
About half an hour.
Half an hour? Okay. All right, but we'll be around if anybody has any questions, but grab a clipboard, grab a comment sheet, and grab some stickers and get to it.
Okay, I'll just send you an email and I'll copy Hunter.
Yeah, how are you? Good to see
I mean, it struck me so
So one scenario could be if you used institutional trials.
Because it was
We could model that.
We know they're safe.
All right.
Oh, Joe. I thought you
which said to me, he must know somebody somewhere. Because I couldn't figure out why he was a kid. I mean, and I thought, well, maybe he had professor relationships. Well, I was trying to not be. As I said about him not striking me in that, what I wanted to say was that hole, he didn't fit in at all. And I don't mean that to be negative. It just
You would know better than we would just looking at the input data that we have. we make an educated guess based on census trends at the tract level, based on zoning, based on land use, based on environmental factors, infrastructure. We look at all those things, but we don't have an in-depth local knowledge of any one specific place necessarily, right? I mean, to us, like, Jaga is a jogger in Boston, right? So we don't even
What line of thought do you believe? Lines that
No, right now.
We're going to formally adjourn the meeting so that those who wish to leave can leave, and those can want to continue can.
A second. I have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.